CBS News. Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan, Sunday on CBS.
Tonight,
I'm so worried about all the people that we don't know about yet.
a Maui hotel owner describes what many survivors are feeling. Then a fourth indictment for Trump. What makes this one so different? And pets and their owners being reunited. Nora O'Donnell in Maui on the CBS Evening News.
Specifically, the participants in association took various actions in Georgia and elsewhere to block the counting of the votes of the presidential electors.
We have a power-mad prosecutor whose loyalty to her political party and to her own ambition exceeds her loyalty to her country.
We see the legal system being weaponized against political opponents. That is un-American and unacceptable.
Hi, I'm Scott McFarland in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Former President Donald Trump and some of his top allies have been indicted by a Georgia grand jury for their alleged roles in a widespread plot to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Trump faces charges ranging from racketeering to fraud, and we should note these are state charges, which is significant because it means they can't be wiped away by a presidential pardon. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis is giving the defendants until noon on Friday, August 25th. To voluntarily surrender. For more on this historic news, let's welcome in our panel. Robert Costa, CBS News' chief election and campaign correspondent. Nicole Killian, congressional correspondent for CBS News. And Hugo Lowell, political investigatives reporter for The Guardian. Nicole, let's start with you. After 24 hours later, I suppose, what is the arrest? What does a voluntary surrender even look like, and how would it be handled?
Well, we're still trying to figure that out, but the short answer is, as you mentioned, these various defendants, including the former president, have up to 10 days to turn themselves in, and that doesn't necessarily mean that an arraignment would take place at this time. This is really just a period for them to be processed, and as we know, the sheriff here in Fulton County has made clear that he intends to treat these defendants, including the former president, just like anyone else, meaning they could potentially get mugshot. So as you can imagine, just like the situation in Washington, in Miami and New York, where we have seen the former president have to come in for various proceedings and court appearances, security tends to be increased, and we expect that we would see a similarly increased security footprint. We know that federal law enforcement has been here on the ground here in Georgia, so really it's just a matter of when the former president is expected to not only surrender, but also eventually be arraigned.
Especially important because timing really is everything here, with 3 other cases and, oh, by the way, a campaign going on. Robert, give us a sense of what you think the trajectory is or the possible timing and schedule.
It's so hard to predict, Scott, but based on what Nicole has been reporting in my conversations with sources close to Trump's legal team, they are going to try to push this down the road as much as possible. He will surrender, we expect, to authorities in the coming week, but there will be motions about dismissing this case, about how the district attorney has handled this case so far. But she has made it clear she is going to plow ahead, but there is going to be a real question from the Trump lawyers about the special grand jury that was convened to investigate this case and the status of a special grand jury versus a so-called regular, normal criminal grand jury. And this is all going to play out alongside the federal case. And different experts, legal experts in Georgia and elsewhere, have suggested to CBS News that the Trump team is going to try to make this a federal case, to push it off the Georgia docket and just let the special counsel be in command of the January 6th case. It's a fascinating legal, historic, and political question about how this will turn out legally in the coming months.
Shifting it to federal court also removes all the cameras from the situation in Fulton County. Cameras are allowed in the court. America can watch those proceedings. Hugo, give us a sense of how the Trump team is responding to this, any differently than they responded to Manhattan, Miami, or the Washington prosecutions?
I mean, not really, right? I mean, the Trump you saw in the days leading up to this indictment was a defiant Trump, and it's the same that goes for his team. And throughout the day yesterday, their primary objective was to try and counter-program what was coming out of the Fulton County DA's office, and they were trying to get ahead of the narrative. And you saw this with a statement late in the evening when they vaguely suggested he had been indicted when really he had no idea what was going on. But I think, that's the posture that's been the case for the federal indictments in the documents case and in the January 6th case. And I think that's going to be the posture going ahead in this case as well.
Nicole, what about that false flag charging document that was briefly published yesterday? What have court officials said about that and how that managed to happen?
Yeah, this is really fascinating. I mean, it certainly raised quite a hullabaloo, especially among members of Trump's legal team who basically say that this was a big fumble on the part of the clerk's office. And, yesterday, of course, we got a statement from the clerk. This was after a news outlet published an alert saying that charges had been filed against the former president before an official indictment had been filed. And so today we are now learning from the clerk's office that this may have been an error on their part, that the clerk, with such a large indictment, it's not unusual that they would use, a pre-existing set of charges just to kind of test the system. And so that's basically what the clerk was doing, kind of doing a trial run, and accidentally posted this fictitious docket to their website. And ultimately, they had to bring it down right away. The clerk's office now saying that they understand the confusion that this matter caused, given the sensitivity of this case. But again, it has raised some questions about the integrity of the process, and certainly something that the former president and his legal team has been seizing on.
Setting up for quite a week next week. Let me show you the calendar. As we have on the calendar for now, with the idea that things could be added, Wednesday, August 23rd, is the GOP primary debate, first one of the season. The 25th is that surrender deadline Nicole referenced for Donald Trump to voluntarily surrender before 12 p.m. to authorities in Georgia. Then Monday, the 28th, pivotal hearing here in Washington in the Jack Smith Special Counsel 2020 election conspiracy case. We could learn a trial date. We can add one more date to that calendar now, Bob, August 21st, a planned press conference in Bedminster, New Jersey by Donald Trump. What's going to happen at that thing?
He's going to make false claims of election fraud, as he has about Georgia since the days after the 2020 election. This is a recurring theme from Trump, a refrain as part of his 2024 campaign. And he is being countered by Republicans, including Republican Governor Brian Kemp of Georgia, who came out today in a statement and said the election in his state, Georgia, was not rigged, not stolen in 2020. And Kemp is not just the governor, two-term governor, Republican, but also the former Secretary of State of Georgia, who oversaw elections in that state as the top election official. And so you see in Trump's campaign right now this focus on 2020, 2020, 2020, as so many Republicans would rather focus on President Biden, on other issues. The challenge so many rival campaigns have when I call around is that they don't know how to get political oxygen in this environment. They don't want to go after Trump directly because they think they could in some way alienate the Trump voter, though it's notable that a lot of them are paying attention to former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who's ticking up in the polls in New Hampshire. And they're saying to themselves, Christie is able to get some traction and attention in this environment, starting to make some inroads in New Hampshire, not casting himself as someone who's forcefully anti-Trump in policy or ideology, but just saying Trump's the wrong person for this moment. And you could see at this debate a little bit of a sharper turn on Trump. But if he doesn't show up, again, how do they get attention if they're not going to bring up the 4 active criminal cases against the frontrunner?
Makes it a lot more difficult if he's not there to focus on him. Hugo, there's a difference to this case. It has not only a local charge, a local set of charges, but it may have different complications for the prosecution, for the defense. What complications could either side face here?
Well, I think from the prosecutor's side, they're looking at the expansive RICO statute in Georgia that requires prosecutors only to show an interrelated pattern of racketeering activity in which to bring this wide RICO case against the former president and 18 other defendants. And I think even the Trump lawyers recognize the fact that, or the way that the RICO statute works in Georgia may cause them problems down the line. That being said, what we were talking earlier about the Trump lawyers wanting to remove this case potentially to federal court, that could cause complications for the district attorney's office because they will have to litigate this. And if they do want to get to trial soon, that's going to be something that injects delay into the process. And as we know, Trump's playbook and overarching strategy is always to delay.
Hugo, Nicole, I know it's got to be sweltering there. Thanks for joining us. Bob Costa, as always, thank you too. As the indictments against Donald Trump pile up, we're joined next by the former head investigator for the House Select January 6th Committee to discuss these mounting legal woes. You're streaming America Decides.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education.
Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And there becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
the threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battery ramps.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Not one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
people are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether,
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct.
Our laws that protect national defense information are critical for the safety and security of the United States.
The indictment alleges that rather than abide by Georgia's legal process for election challenges, the defendants engaged in a criminal racketeering enterprise to overturn Georgia's presidential election result.
Welcome back to America Decides. Former President Donald Trump now faces his fourth criminal indictment in less than 5 months. The Fulton County, Georgia grand jury indicted Trump and 18 of his allies for their efforts to overturn the 2020 election results in the state, according to the new indictment. Timothy Hafey joins us now. He previously served as lead investigator for the House Select January 6th Committee, which investigated so many of these things. First of all, Timothy, give me a sense if anything in the new Fulton County indictment surprised you or was more than you expected.
No, Scott, not really. I mean, it's the same core story that the committee developed in hearings last summer that we put forth in our report. It's the same core story that Jack Smith has put forth in his indictment. There's some new meat on the bones. There's some new text messages, some phone calls, some detail about some Georgia specific stuff. And there's also this Coffee County series of events, the ability to access the voting machines and the ballots in Coffee County. That was a bit beyond. But it's the same core story. It's a multi-part plan across the nation to subvert democracy, prevent the transfer of power, and ignore the will of the people in not just Georgia, but in other states.
In the committee's series of hearings last year, the witnesses from Georgia may have been the most dynamic or compelling on camera. Let me have you listen to some of your work from those hearings last year.
Haven't been anywhere at all. I've gained about 60 pounds. I second guess everything that I do, all because of lies.
Do you know how it feels to have the President of the United States to target you? The President of the United States is supposed to represent every American.
The numbers are the numbers. The numbers don't lie. We had many allegations, and we investigated every single one of them. In fact, I challenged my team, did we miss anything? They said that there was over 66,000 underage voters. We found that there's actually zero. You can register to vote in Georgia. When you're 17 and a half, you have to be 18 by Election Day. We checked that out, every single voter.
Probably no surprise, then, that this is a component of this Fulton County indictment. Did you expect or did you hope Jack Smith, the special counsel, would make these figures, these Georgia figures, a component of his indictment?
Yeah, I think he will, Scott. I think, the indictment is meant to be a summary of some of the evidence, but not all. I think the Georgia story will figure prominently in both the federal case in Washington, and obviously it's the centerpiece of the Fani Willis indictment in Georgia because it's so compelling, where you have everything from the Secretary of State talking about direct pressure from the President of the United States to Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, right? Two people that work hard and anonymously to conduct elections in Georgia, and the abuse and the threats to which they were subject. I mean, Georgia has always been in some ways the most dramatic manifestation of this multi-part plan to disrupt the election. So I think you're going to see those same people potentially not just in Fulton County, but also in Washington.
You think Jack Smith's case would grow, or likely will grow, to include Ruby Freeman or the allegations made by Brett Raffensperger?
Certainly Raffensperger. I mean, I think the special counsel indictment does include some narrative about Georgia. Whether it reaches into the threats to Freeman and Moss like the Georgia indictment has, I don't know. But again, what's important is that what happened in Georgia, while dramatic, while really significant, was not unusual. Similar things happened in Michigan, and happened in Nevada, and happened in Wisconsin, happened in Pennsylvania, happened in Arizona. And Jack Smith, I think, will plug Georgia into that broader context and show how consistent that activity was by the president and his co-conspirators.
We see the top line in this charging document: racketeering, RICO, the type of charge you hear about in mob cases, in organized crime. Can you explain what racketeering is for those of us who are using the term but may not be as well versed in the law?
Yeah, sure. I tried RICO cases as a federal prosecutor years ago, and I used to explain it to juries as it's a fancy term for a crime spree, right? It's a group of people who get together and form some sort of enterprise. And that could be an informal group that associates, in fact, to do a bunch of stuff together. And then they have to commit what's called a pattern of racketeering activity. That's just a series of predicate acts that are criminal, that all forward some criminal goal. It was initially conceived as sort of an anti-mafia statute, but it's had applications in lots of different areas. In the cases that I tried, they were violent drug gang cases. And it fits here. I mean, this was a group of people that, while not an official organization, associated with each other purposefully with the intent to commit a series of acts, criminal acts, intended to interrupt the joint session and prevent the transfer of power. So it sounds complicated and it sounds intimidating, but it's really quite simple. And my guess is that the DA, when this case is tried, will simplify it along those lines.
Just a moment left here, Timothy, but do you expect some or many of these 19 defendants to flip, or the 18 co-defendants to do so?
very, very hard to predict. You've tried cases, you can never tell. But look, just going back to my own RICO experience, almost every RICO indictment led to a superseding RICO indictment because some of the people initially charged, when facing the serious exposure of a racketeering charge, decide to make a deal and use the information that they have as currency to get either a guilty plea or leniency at sentencing. That very well could happen here. And some of those 19 who were charged could end up going over to the government side. And some of those unindicted co-conspirators could similarly cut deals and make the case even stronger.
In Charlottesville tonight, Timothy Hafey. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott.
Coming up, we'll break down what leaders on both sides of the aisle are saying about potentially violent uprisings in response to the latest indictment. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman. Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur, Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom. We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job?
I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education. If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgments of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Welcome back to America Decides. As former President Trump deals with the impact of new indictments, officials on both sides of the aisle are working to investigate and eliminate politically motivated violence. The number of people who agree force is justified to restore Trump to the presidency is up to nearly 18 million American adults. Officials are predicting additional calls for violence, similar to those seen leading up to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Robert Pape joins us now on set, professor of political science at the University of Chicago. Bob, it's good to have you here.
Thank you.
How much is a 4th indictment going to increase the possibility or the risk of violence?
Well, with the first federal indictment, we already saw the violent support for Trump go up by 50%. In the last month, we saw a threat against Biden turn into a shootout and a death. We saw a month before that an assailant take bombs and guns to Obama's house here in Washington. And so what we are seeing is disturbing rises in both support for political violence and also actual threats just in the last few months. Now, that is likely to go up, but it's already gone up more than I think the public really knows just in the last month, month and a half. And this is really surprising and disturbing. We don't normally have multiple threats to the president and the former president within a month of each other. Yes, they've happened before, but we're seeing them more often, more frequently, and we're also seeing, as you just reported in our surveys at the University of Chicago, the support for the use of force to restore Trump to the presidency up by 50%. Also want to point out that the left is also becoming radical. There are tens of millions who now report that they support the use of force to prevent Donald Trump from becoming the president. Our political leaders can do something about this, and we have a great opportunity with the August 23rd Republican presidential debate.
I'm going to press you on that. I think that's really the next forum so many political candidates, wannabe presidents, are going to have. I want to button up one thing. In the case outside of President Obama's home in D.C., prosecutors updated it to say no explosives in that van. Small note, but worth mentioning because the case is still moving along in the federal courts. They have all these GOP contenders on stage in Milwaukee, Wednesday, August 23rd. What should they be asked about indictment, since they're not indicted, but their competitor is?
They should be asked to stand up and stand together and make a pledge that whether political violence comes from Republicans or from the left, they will oppose publicly political violence. This is important because Mike Pence will be on that stage. And if they won't take that pledge to reject, oppose, and abhor political violence, whether it comes from the right and the left, they should be asked, so it's okay if Trump supporters chant, "Hang Mike Pence," and build a gallows just yards from where he is?
You'd mentioned that there's a number of threatening behaviors or threatening tendencies coming from different directions. Everybody has a little bit of their hands dirty on this. Explain what you mean by that, because at this point we see 1,000 plus Trump supporters charged with being part of January 6th, and we don't see a symmetrical set of threats or charges by that number and that magnitude coming against those who would be his opponents.
There's a reason why we're seeing active threats from the right and not from the left. Those sentiments I talk about are like kindling in a wildfire. Trump's rhetoric is very incendiary to touch that off. President Biden's rhetoric is the opposite. He is calming. He's a calming force. In our surveys, the more people support Biden, even among the few Republicans, the less they support violence for Trump. And so what Biden has been doing for the last 2 years is calming, whether it's with the Supreme Court or and what he's doing is he's trying to redirect the anger into voting, not into violence and agitation, whereas Trump is confrontation. Joe Biden is, let's make our institutions even better. And that is our best way ahead.
There's this sense that what happened January 6, 2021 is not plausible to happen again because everybody would be ready for it. There'll be a war footing on January 6, 2025. Where do you think, what type of event or type of moment do you think the vulnerability exists most?
The biggest thing we have to worry about is lone wolf violence that is going to be extremely difficult to predict and to see. We saw this with Oklahoma City in 1996. So this was several years after Waco, and we cannot protect every possible target that the extremists could go for. And unfortunately, what we have been seeing pretty much since the first year of the Trump presidency is more domestic extremism, whether it is to support Trump or to punish people for not supporting Trump enough. And that is, we saw on January 6th, explode into a crowd. That's not quite impossible to happen again, but we need to realize that campaigns of domestic terrorism, say in Northern Ireland, say in West Germany, say in Spain, have happened in democracies. And what has preceded all of those campaigns? higher support for political violence in the general population.
And we also note the reporting from the U.S. Capitol Police, roughly 10,000 threat investigations they're handling each year. Robert Pape, the University of Chicago, thanks for being here in D.C.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate your time, and we appreciate your watching. And a programming note for everybody. America Decides heads to the Hawkeye State. We'll be live from the Iowa State Fair in Des Moines on Wednesday. My colleague Major Garrett there all day long Wednesday and will anchor a special edition of this program you can watch right here on CBS News. That does it for today. Stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals. How did you deal with being discriminated against?
I just worked harder.
The future of an ever-evolving U.S. military when we go person to person.
Stories start with the who, what, when, and where.
CBS News has been following this story. Camilla, why is the government relying on these devices to track migrants?
But it's why it's important to you that matters most. Doctor, why are federal health advisors focusing on this specific pill for contraception? And knowing what to ask is how you open the door to a deeper understanding. I'm John Dickerson. See you on Prime Time. Streaming free everywhere.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?